Hi, it's Dena Tollefson, and you're watching Crimson Sunflowers, Part 2 of 2. Welcome to my studio. I'm toning the canvas here with fluid yellow acrylic, yellow ochre, and I'm hoping that you'll find this video super relaxing and restorative and healing. I'm going to be sharing with you today the process that I used to create this acrylic painting, and also share with you 3 pros and 2 cons of painting in layers. So sunflowers are a subject that has always really intrigued me. I find their personalities of the flowers, the spiky forms that they have, and they're strong and elegant. I want to capture those feelings in paint. So if you haven't had a chance yet to watch part 1 of this, which was the part where I'm laying on these first layers here. I started with the yellow ochre, the fluid yellow ochre, and now applying heavy-bodied acrylics. These are from Golden. Applying these with paintbrushes. And once all of these dry, I'm letting these layers dry in between, and then I'll be ready to do a technique on top called Daubism. So Daubism is a art technique I developed in the year 2000, and basically it's colors that are individually mixed, and then the colors don't smear one into the other. So it's an individual color, and it's applied with either spoons or palette knives, and the resultant cupped form seems like it looks like it has varnish on it, but it just is shiny naturally from the smooth. You just go on and do one stroke of paint, and then don't touch it again, and then it will stay shiny. But these cupped forms, the entire canvas ends up getting covered in this super heavy texture. So I'm using now this larger spoon. I've got 2 different size spoons that I use, and a note is if you end up using any things that you normally would use for food preparation, once you use them for painting, they can't ever be used again for food. So you want to keep those things separate. I have my 2 spoons I keep in a separate area, just so I don't accidentally eat with one of them. But just for safety things, paints and pastels and things can contain chemicals that we don't want to put inside our bodies. So this painting is for the Red Rover Art Challenge. It's a art challenge that I am hosting on my channel as a way to bring all of us, we are all one art family, bring us together. And it is just, on these art challenges, it is so fascinating to me to see how many different ways that everyone comes up with the prompt. And I love to see what you create for the challenges. So if you aren't already participating in my challenges, I welcome you to participate in these. My channel is all about encouraging other artists and that type of thing. 6 years ago, I left a successful job as an engineer to pursue art full time, and it's really been a joy for me to be able to expand out on social media and meet so many of you, and to meet you. And I'm really glad that you're here on my channel, and I'm hoping that you'll come back again. So let's talk a little bit about the pros and cons of painting in layers. So pro number 1 is the idea that when you paint in layers, whether that's watercolor, acrylic, oil, whatever it is that you're gouache, whatever it is you're doing, you can achieve effects when you're painting in layers that are not possible to do, other techniques and such that are not possible to do if you just try and do everything in one pass. So examples would be scumbling, dry brushing, glazing, any kind of impasto techniques, those type of things. When you're doing things in layers, a pro of doing that is that it allows these techniques that are possible, where you can look through and see from one layer below. The old masters, I love those. If you guys are, if you've seen those paintings from out of Holland, the old masters, where they would go in and do like botanicals, tulips, and that type of thing. They would build up these layers, sometimes hundreds of layers of glazes, and that's all possible with this, idea of layering. So another pro of building up your painting in layers is that you'll get a fresh perspective when you let the painting sit and you come back. So if you notice, if an astute observer will notice that typically you'll see me wearing different things throughout my videos. Partway through it looks like I'm changing clothes and that type of thing. It's because I've got many paintings going at any one time, and I allow the paint to dry. Then I can go back to it and get a fresh perspective on it. And sometimes, especially if it's a larger painting or something that you're spending a lot of time on, taking breaks, whether that break is a few hours, a few days, a few weeks, in between sessions, can be very helpful. So now let's talk about a con of painting in layers. So there are two cons I want to share with you today. One of the cons is matching colors. Now, no matter how good of a color mixer you are, it is always tricky to try and match a color exactly. So one tip with that is, if you are going to be stopping your painting midway and you've got a certain color going that you need to continue across your canvas, my suggestion is always try and use whatever color that you're needing to go across your canvas. Finish that whole section before stopping, because a con of waiting and painting in layers and then coming back is that trying to match your colors is tricky. Another tip that you can do is you can save a small little wet piece of the thing, like in a small little plastic container, or in some in like a plastic wrap, that type of thing. Just store a little baggie, something like that. Store a tiny amount of the paint so you can exactly, when you're mixing up a new batch, you can see what the wet paint looks like, because especially acrylic paint will dry slightly different in color when it's actually dry than when it's wet. Oil color not so much, but especially acrylic paint, and especially watercolor paint. So let's talk about the second con of painting in layers. Now, if you're like me, and once in a while you might do a painting demo, or you're painting in plein air, or you're at a plein air event where everything must be completed start to finish on site, that makes it tricky for painting in layers. And so the spontaneity and the immediate completion, the joy of finishing a work of art all in one session, you can't get that if you're painting in layers. And so one way I know for me that I get around this when I'm working like in plein air is I'll try and limit the number of layers that I'm using. So I might skip an underpainting, or if they allow me to bring an underpainting to the event, and then I'm only putting other layers on top, I'll look at that. Or if it's one where you need to do everything start to finish, like plain canvas to finish, I'll try and pick a subject that doesn't require as many layers, that type of thing. Just a little, everybody will have their own methods that they use, but those are ones that are helpful to me. Okay, so you can see now I'm using a palette knife, the painting that I'm working here, the Crimson Sunflowers. Oh, and also for the Red Rover Art Challenge, I have a playlist for every challenge, and all of the artists who are participating, we've had over 50 artists participate in this. Everyone is using the hashtag Red Rover Art Challenge, and you can check out the playlist on my channel. I encourage you to watch the other participants' videos and show them some love and support, because we are all one art family, and it is wonderful and exciting to see what our friends are coming up with. So this yellow you see here is diarrhea yellow. I love using that color. It reminds me of sunshine in a can. But that yellow just feels so vibrant and fresh. So now let's talk about the third pro of working in painting in layers. And this is, I think, probably the most important one, and that's allowing appropriate, that when you paint in layers, you can allow proper drying time for curing and for archival, to get a truly archival result. And when I say archival result, I'm saying that if you are to give your artwork or sell your artwork, the person receiving that, their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren, and then from then on, you want your artwork to live on. And by using appropriate and proper tried and true methods of painting, this helps your art so that it remains archival and chemically stable. So what I mean by that is acrylic paint, for example. If you've ever had this where you might paint, let's say you run your brush across your canvas and then you come back later and you paint on top of it, like immediately on top, say a minute or so later, you might notice that some of the paint rubs off from below, and you thought it was dry because it's acrylics dry quickly, but it seems as though some of it rubs off. Or if you come back and you maybe took and you rubbed against something. I polish my own nails, and so I know this effect that I can polish my nails and I go in and I look, and then if I bump my nail against something, maybe an hour later, it leaves a mark. But if I bump it a day or two later, it does not leave a mark. That's because the paint on the top surface is dry, but it is not dry below. So acrylic paint, and an hour, roughly an hour, depending on how thickly you apply it, roughly an hour after you apply acrylic paint, it will be called dry to the touch. But that is different than cured. So curing acrylic paint takes 1 to 3 weeks, depending on temperature, again, how heavily you apply the paint, that type of thing, or it can even go longer than 1 to 3 weeks for acrylic paint to be cured. And I'll share with you a kind of a sad and funny, but it wasn't funny at the time, but thing. When I was a little girl, my father took, my father Dietrich and Helen Schaefer, if you aren't already subscribed to their channels, definitely subscribe to them. But my father had a Buick Park Avenue with a sparkle finished, a brown car. This is back in the 1980s. And he took it to a shop to have it repainted. We go, we're all excited. It looks fantastic. It's got a sparkly brown finish on it, glittering in the sun. We drive it home. We get out of the car, and my parents get out of the car to go in the house. This is when I was much younger. I'm 54 now, so this was decades ago. And I go and I open up the door, but it inadvertently banged into a metal trash can. And oh my goodness, my beloved, calm father, Dietrich Schaefer, he gets upset so rarely, but he was just devastated that this, basically it just peeled the paint, this wet paint off of or it was dry to the touch, but not cured. So this epoxy, or car paint, whatever they put on cars, I want to say it's maybe like an epoxy type of paint, but that's an example of where it was dry but not cured. And it was just terrible. So we ended up taking it back, and they ended up having to repaint the car. So it's just a thing. But this idea of drying, proper drying time, and this is also very, very important if you do like I do, where you put acrylic paint down and then on top of that you put oil paint. That is especially important to wait until at least until your paint is dry to the touch. Better yet, you wait until it is cured in these layers. So when I tone my canvases, I will typically tone them, and then I will set them aside for a week, 2 weeks, something like that. Then go in and paint the underpainting, let that dry, then go on top with either thick daubs of acrylic paint or go in with thick daubs of oil paint. And then even within the layers of oil paint or acrylic paint, whichever it happens to be, I will allow the drying time. I'll allow drying time in between the daubs of paint, so that all of these layers below, you want to be able to allow the moisture to evaporate or come up, and the full curing process. If it's oil paint, you want the linseed oil there's going to be certain chemicals in there, and you want that, or walnut oil, whatever it is, you want that to be able to dry appropriately. So in watercolor, if you've had experience with, and say hi to Groshi and Romeo, by the way, they say hello. If you're painting in watercolor, if you let your paper dry and then you put more pigment on top, you can create these layered effects. It's just a wonderful thing. But this idea of drying your paint, the difference between drying and curing and working in layers, it will help your artwork to fully achieve fully archival status. The other thing too, with even with an oil, sometimes people say, well, how long does it take for an oil painting to dry? And we know scientists will use an oil painting. They will actually be able to date, in addition to what pigments were used and what materials were used, that type of thing. Another thing that they will do is they will be able to look at the moisture level of the oil that was used, and they'll be able to look and see, because oil paint can cure, but it actually doesn't really totally ever really dry. Acrylic paint will dry into a flexible form, but oil paint actually has a different property to it, where it will always be, it sounds like it's always wet. It's not always wet, but it'll be dry to the touch. But then your oil paint will take years, decades, even centuries to actually what we would consider fully cure or fully dry. So hopefully that made sense about the layers. If you've been working in layers, and if you have any questions about that, leave me a comment in the section below, and then also let me know if you have been wanting to work in layers or that type of thing, or you have, and you'd like to give some advice to our fellow artists. That would be wonderful. Go ahead and leave your comments in there below as well. So you can see I'm again with this layering process, daubs over additional daubs. As time has gone on, I've been able to build up these layers, and because this is acrylic, this is all acrylic, I'm able to put the layers on without having too much time go between. When it's an oil painting, I'll typically allow days or weeks in between the layers. And I'm striving to get the exuberance of a sunflower and that spiky feeling that they have. I'm trying to convey that in paint. Well, I'm really glad that you are here today with me, and I'm hoping that you'll come and visit me again in the studio. It's been great having you here. So until next time, this is Dena Tollefson, and all my best to you. And take care. Bye-bye.